make the point, and which is, I guess, the critical point I'm going to make at the very end, that how China behaves as number one will be very strongly influenced by how America behaves as number one. And that's why these three stories are important, and that's why I'll begin with them. The first story is about an event that happened at the height of the global financial crisis in 2008, 2009. And until that financial crisis came about, the Chinese were very happy that they had developed an interdependent relationship with the United States of America, so that while China relied on America to sell its exports and to buy its products, America in turn relied on China to buy U.S. Treasury bills and to make sure that the U.S. could continue to sell these Treasury bills overseas. So they both felt that, as Tom Friedman said in one of his columns, that they were joined at the hip in a mutually interdependent relationship. And indeed, I can tell you this, as a matter of fact, at the height of the crisis, when things looked really bad, the Bush administration actually sent an envoy to Beijing in 2008 and said, please continue buying US Treasury bills, because that's what we need to preserve global financial stability. And the Chinese were happy to do so, and I suspect the Chinese even felt a bit smug. See, the Americans depend on us. But then, lo and behold, about a month later, in a move that completely shocked the Chinese, the US Fed announced the first round of QE measures in November 2008. And as you know, with the QE measures, essentially the US could print money to buy US Treasury bills. And lo and behold, the Chinese said, what's happened to this interdependence? The Americans can just turn on the printing press and take away this dependence on China. And indeed, one commentator at Axel Merck said, the US is no longer focusing on the quality of its treasuries. In the past, Washington sought to promote a strong dollar through sound fiscal management. Today, however, policymakers are simply printing greenbacks. And Merck said that by relying on the Federal Reserve's printing press, the US has effectively told other nations, it's our dollar, but it's your problem. So that's one story about the relationship, financial relationship between US and China. And you mentioned a second story from the financial world, which I think not many people notice. Now, I think you must have heard that the United States has been prosecuting several foreign banks, including HSBC, RBS, UBS, Credit Suisse, and Standard Chartered. Now, for example, Standard Chartered Bank was fined $340 million for making payments to Iran. And most Americans reacted with equanimity to this fine paid by Standard Chartered Bank, and thought that the bank was just being fined for dealing with the evil Iranian regime. However, few Americans actually noticed that Standard Chartered Bank, which was domiciled in the UK, had broken no British laws and had not violated any UN Security Council sanctions, but because the payments made through the Standard Chartered system went through the New York clearing system, the US dollars entered the territory of US laws, and so Standard Chartered Bank was fined. And this is what is called, by the way, extraterritorial application of domestic laws. Again, remember this story when I come to the conclusion. And the third story is about the SWIFT system. SWIFT. I think many of you may know what it is. It's a system for clearing payments between countries. I think it's centered in Brussels. And when things got very rough between United States and Russia. Recently, as you know, the United States said that it might consider denying access to Russia to the SWIFT system. And in a column by Farid Zakaria, one of our mutual friends, a graduate of Harvard, he described the Russian reaction to the possibility of being denied access to the SWIFT system. And interestingly enough, most of us, when you look at Russia, we think Putin is the bad guy, Medvedev is a nice guy, good guy. But there was a good guy, Medvedev, who said, the Russian response to any denial of access to SWIFT will know no limits. So clearly, again, this was a global system for clearing payments, and the United States was trying to use it for either for bilateral relations in terms of punishing Russia. Now, these are the three stories I'm telling you at the beginning, and I'm going to conclude with these stories at the end. Now, first of all, let me now answer the three questions that I mentioned earlier. First, what are China's goals and aspirations as it emerges as number one? And here, the most obvious point that I need to make and emphasize at the outset is that even though China, as you know, is still run by the Chinese Communist Party, I can assure you of one thing: the Chinese leaders, unlike Stalin or Lenin or Khrushchev, have no desire to prove the superiority of the communist system. In fact, as you know, Khrushchev famously said in November 18, 1956, whether you like it or not, history is on our side, we will bury you. Now, the Chinese don't have the kind of aspirations that the Russians had to in any way prove the superiority of the communist ideology. So if it's not communism that they're trying to promote, what is it they're trying to promote? And the simple answer is that they would just like to revive Chinese civilization. Indeed, if there's one thing that motivates the Chinese leaders, it is their memory of the many humiliations that China has suffered for over a century, as you know, from 1842, the Opium War, to roughly 1949, or you can even go beyond that. And the one thing that drives the Chinese is a simple credo which says, no more humiliation for China. That's the great motivation. And indeed, Xi Jinping, when he spoke to UNESCO in March 2014, this is what he said are the goals of the Chinese people. He said the Chinese people are striving to fulfill the Chinese dream of the great renewal of the Chinese nation. The Chinese dream is about the prosperity of the country, the rejuvenation of the nation, and the happiness of the people. It reflects both the ideal of the Chinese people today and our time-honored tradition to seek constant progress. The Chinese dream will be realized through balanced development and mutual reinforcement of material and cultural progress. Without the continuation and development of civilization or the promotion and prosperity of culture, the Chinese dream will not come true, unquote. And I think in those few sentences, he brilliantly captured what is the heart of the aspirations of the Chinese people, to move away from an era of having been humiliated for a long time to an era where they once again feel proud about Chinese civilization and what it can accomplish. And indeed, if the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, could change its name to CCP, the Chinese Civilization Party, then I think it would be a more accurate description of the goals and aspirations of the CCP.